A torch flickers against the damp stone walls, casting jagged shadows that twist and shiver like living things. The metallic scent of rust, mingled with the acrid stench of sweat and fear, hangs heavy in the air, clinging to the prisoner's ragged breath. Each inhalation shudders through the body, a fragile rhythm against the oppressive silence. Chains sway gently in the darkness, their iron links groaning under the weight of centuries, silent witnesses to every whispered confession and tortured denial. The walls seem to pulse with memory, absorbing sound and suspicion alike, pressing the fear deeper into the marrow of anyone who dares enter. Outside, the echo of armored footsteps rises over the stones, relentless and measured. Each strike of heel on cobblestone is a drumbeat of authority, a herald of the Inquisitor's inevitable presence. The prisoner's eyes dart to the shadows, seeking a refuge that does not exist. Above, water drips from the cracked ceiling, a slow, unhurried rhythm that marks the passage of time in this forsaken place. Each drop hits the stone with a hollow ping, a small, merciless reminder that hope is measured in moments, and moments can stretch into eternity when trapped in terror. The instruments of pain line the walls and corners, tongs blackened by fire, wheels that groan under tension, spiked racks polished to a cruel gleam. They are more than tools. They are symbols, embodiments of control and the authority of fear. Each mark, each notch, tells a story of suffering, of confessions extracted from trembling lips, of lives bent beneath the weight of accusation. Yet even here, amidst the harsh geometry of stone and iron, human resilience refuses to be entirely extinguished. Fingers curl into fists beneath threadbare sleeves. Lips move in whispers of prayer or defiance, words swallowed before they can reach the ears of their tormentors. The prisoner rocks slightly, knees drawn up to chest, a trembling coil of flesh and bone. Eyes wide, pupils reflecting the flickering torch, they catch every movement. The slow clink of chain against wall, the subtle shift of shadow, the breath that fogs the corner of the cell. There is a hunger here too, not just for bread, not just for warmth, but for mercy, for acknowledgement that life has not yet surrendered entirely to fear. A candle guttering in the corner struggles against the damp, its feeble flame throwing elongated, quivering shapes across the stone. It is fragile, yet stubborn, a tiny rebellion against the darkness, mirroring the faint defiance that lives in the prisoner's gaze. The walls themselves seem to lean inward, breathing suspicion into every crevice. Here, guilt is not only personal. It is a tangible presence that scratches at the mind and bends the spine. The prisoner does not only fear the Inquisitor, they fear the weight of centuries of justice, carried in bricks and mortar, in the solemn rhythm of dripping water, in the silent testimony of instruments that have outlived their makers. Each moment is a tightrope walk between despair and defiance, and the air is thick with anticipation, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in a tomb. A distant clatter, a muffled command, a boot striking stone too sharply. Each sound is a herald of impending interrogation. The prisoner flinches, but the body refuses to collapse entirely into submission. Eyes narrow, hands clench. A whisper slips past lips. A prayer, a promise, or perhaps a defiance too quiet to hear but loud enough to sustain the soul. It is in these moments that the human spirit flickers brightest, small and ephemeral, yet unyielding in the face of mechanized cruelty. The torchlight dances over the worn floors, illuminating the history etched into every surface. Scars in the stone mark the struggles of those who came before, the desperate scratches of fingernails, the stains of sweat and blood, long faded into muted brown. Shadows pool in corners, thickening and thinning with the movement of the flame, like smoke curling in invisible currents. In this theater of suffering, every gesture, every breath, Every flicker of light carries weight. The prisoner's shadow stretches long and thin, a silhouette of endurance and fear entwined, a living echo of the countless souls who have passed through this chamber before. And yet, even as the instruments of control gleam, even as the echoing footsteps close the distance, there is a pulse of humanity. The prisoner's lips move again, barely audible, forming fragments of prayer or vow. Perhaps a memory surfaces, a soft echo of laughter, a fleeting image of warmth, of sunlight on fields beyond the stone walls. For a heartbeat, the oppressive cold is pierced by recollection, by a fragile thread of life that insists upon continuity, that refuses to be wholly consumed by dread. The Inquisitor's shadow begins to merge with the torchlight at the entrance, a looming figure whose presence bends the room to its will. Every muscle tightens in anticipation. The air grows thicker, more viscous, as if it too recognizes the inevitability of confrontation. Chains clink, echoing across the chamber, and the prisoner exhales a long, tremulous breath. The sound is both surrender and resistance, a declaration that, even in fear, existence persists. Outside the cell, wind presses against the stones, carrying the faintest whispers from corridors long abandoned. They speak of history, of judgment, of secrets carved into the architecture itself. Inside, the prisoner's gaze does not leave the flickering candle. The tiny flame is now more than a source of light. It is a witness, a companion, a small defiance against the machinery of authority that seeks to crush spirit beneath iron boots and sharpened instruments. The shadows continue their silent dance, coiling and stretching with each breath of air, each flicker of the torch. There is a rhythm here, unbroken, eternal, time measured not in hours, but in fear, in hope, in the tension of what is yet to come. The prisoner rocks slightly, drawing strength from the candle's glow, from the pulse of life that refuses to be extinguished. Each breath becomes an act of resistance, each shiver a testament to the persistence of the soul under oppression. And as the torch guttering in the corner throws one last elongated shadow across the walls, the scene closes not in resolution, but in suspended anticipation. The prisoner's shadow stretches long and thin, a quiet monument to suffering and survival, a reminder that even in chambers designed for despair, the human spirit persists. Beyond the stones, beyond the chains, the footsteps grow nearer, promising confrontation and confession, judgment and endurance. And in this silent communion of fear and defiance, the stage is set for the darker truths of medieval justice, waiting to unfold, waiting for the story to breathe once more. A whisper of memory surfaces, a stolen moment of sunlight, the warmth of a hearth, laughter now ghosted into absence. It is brief, almost cruel in its brevity, a spark of the life once known before these walls drew their veil. And yet even here, in the bowels of despair, courage flickers. It is faint, fragile as the candlelight, yet persistent, defying the weight of iron and stone. The prisoner's pulse beats in tandem with that candle, each throb a quiet rebellion against the omnipresent darkness. The instruments on the table shimmer with silent malevolence. A hammer rests like a fallen titan, its edges cruelly sharp against the firelight. Pincers glint with the promise of grip and tear. The wheel, coiled with deliberate precision, waits to mark a body as one might inscribe a name in stone. These objects are not mere tools. They are statements of control, declarations of dominion over flesh and will. And yet, even in their cold certainty, the prisoner discerns a rhythm, a cadence in which the human spirit might, if only barely, persist. From the barred window high above, light filters in as a whisper. It casts long, narrow beams that trace the contours of misery. Dust motes suspended like stars in a night without sky, chains swaying with an almost sentient patience. The raven cries again, a solitary testament to what is seen and what is hidden, its black wings slicing the light as if to mark the divide between hope and hopelessness. The room itself seems to breathe with a ritualistic precision. Each scrape, each scar, each echo an offering to an unholy liturgy of suffering. Silence falls, thick and expectant, only to be punctured by the soft, deliberate scraping of boots on stone. The prisoner's thoughts sharpen, fragmented yet coherent. A memory of sunlight now twisted into longing, the scent of hearth replaced by the acrid tang of fear. Every nerve stands on edge, each breath measured, for the next sound could be a step toward liberation, or the initiation of torment. The candle guttering on its stand offers a final, flickering glimpse of the chamber's true weight. Shadows stretch and collapse with every breath, the walls themselves seeming to pulse with stories they cannot contain. The instruments wait patiently, gleaming with cruel intent, while the prisoner huddles, a solitary form of defiance against the inevitable. Here, in this suspended moment, anticipation and dread intertwine as inseparably as lovers or enemies, each feeding the other, each sharpening the senses to a razor's edge. Yet beneath this oppressive weight, beneath the ever-present gaze of stone and steel, the human heart asserts itself. A faint pulse of courage, nearly swallowed by the darkness, whispers that even in places carved from suffering, the spirit seeks a flicker of light. It is the quiet resistance of the soul, a heartbeat echoing against chains and walls, a promise that all is not lost, that even here, in the ritual of fear, the essence of hope survives. And as the candle sputters its last, as the shadows merge into a single black tide, the prisoner rises, not with triumph, but with the quiet assertion of being. The door waits, the bell tolls, the raven watches, and the instruments lie in patient menace. Each element conspires to test the measure of courage, yet the moment lingers, suspended between what is endured and what is imagined. The chamber, with its weight of history and ritual, exhales one final, whispered testament, that even amid the cruelest of darkness, the human spirit trembles, but it does not vanish. The heavy iron door, once opened, now closes again, the sound echoing through the hollow chamber like the final heartbeat of an unseen witness. And in the shadows left behind, the pulse of courage remains, fragile yet indomitable, hinting at the trials yet to come, the choices yet to be made, and the relentless, unyielding descent into the cruel depths of a medieval world shaped as much by fear as by faith. The heavy iron door groans on its rusted hinges, a sound that vibrates through stone and marrow alike. When it finally yields, a breath of fetid air escapes, thick with the scent of damp straw and human despair. It clings to the skin, cold and insistent, as though the walls themselves exhale the memory of every soul that has ever trembled within this chamber. Beyond the threshold lies a darkness alive with menace. Chains swing lazily from the ceiling, their iron links whispering secrets of screams long silenced. Floors, marred by stains that have hardened into history, reflect the faint flicker of torchlight, each shadow dancing like a restless spirit across the rough-hewn walls. Names, carved with desperation, streak the stone in jagged script. Marks of hope turned to agony, prayers left unread. In the corner, a figure huddles, a fragile knot of human flesh pressed against the rough texture of straw. Every movement scrapes against the coarse bedding, each subtle shift echoing like a muted drumbeat across the hollow vault. The eyes, wide and searching, flit toward the sound of boots striking stone, a rhythm as predictable as the heartbeat of fear. The distant clamor of a bell tolls, marking the approach of wardens whose presence bends the air with authority and cruelty. Shadows stretch and twist with their advance, and the prisoner's breath catches, stifled beneath the weight of anticipation. A table sits just beyond reach, a tableau of torment meticulously arranged. Instruments gleam in torchlight, hammers polished until they reflect the fire, pincers coiled with intent, wheels poised to rend. Each metallic glint slices through the dim, a silent herald of pain yet to come. The prisoner recoils instinctively, ears straining against the clanging steel that threatens to mark the opening of suffering. The tools are more than metal. They are instruments of ritualized terror, each scar a stanza in an unending poem of agony. Above, a raven cries, a lone, black witness to the secrets of stone and shadow. Its shrill note pierces the gloom, momentary and fleeting, yet somehow echoing the loneliness of the prisoner below. Smoke from a candle, guttering and near spent, rises in lazy coils, weaving a veil between the living and the specters of memory. Each curl of smoke carries the essence of centuries, of anguish passed down as if fear itself were an inheritance. Within this interplay of light and shadow, sound and silence, the chamber is more than a room. It is a crucible where flesh meets history, where courage and despair wrestle beneath the indifferent gaze of stone walls. The air vibrates with a rhythm of dread. Footsteps grow nearer, deliberate and unrelenting, hammering against the silence like judgment itself. The prisoner's body, tense and coiled, responds in kind, muscles straining for flight where none exists. Each chain rattles as if stirred by invisible hands, and the air seems to thicken with expectation, suffocating yet electric. The mind races, mapping every corner, every shadow, searching for an escape that is neither promised nor imagined. The echo of a dropped chain resonates like a somber drumbeat through the stone corridors, vibrating against the thick walls, shaking loose centuries of dust and despair. Each metallic note hangs in the cold air, trembling, then fading into silence, leaving only the faint hum of dread. In the dim light, shadows crawl across the uneven stones, pooling in corners like spilled ink, and the smell of wet leather and decayed straw rises, tangling with the bitter tang of iron that seems to seep from the walls themselves. It is a scent that clings to the lungs, sharp and uncompromising, a perfume of fear made manifest. The prisoner sits shackled to the cold floor, wrists bound by thick iron that bites into flesh with every involuntary twitch. His gaunt face is half hidden in the flickering torchlight, but his eyes, hollow, alert, unyielding, have memorized every inch of this chamber. He counts the drip of water falling from the ceiling, each drop a metronome measuring his slow decay. The walls, slick with condensation, seem alive, whispering the histories of those who came before him. Screams that never reached ears, tears that soaked straw and stone, flesh pressed against iron in futile resistance. Outside, the court murmurs with rumor. The distant voices of law and judgment ripple through the castle, a world both removed and oppressive, a distant storm that promises reckoning but offers no comfort. Inside, the prisoner knows that the real sentence has already been delivered, long before any words were uttered. The instruments of suffering line the walls like sentinels. A spiked wheel rests in the corner, gleaming dully as if hungry for flesh. A heavy cudgel, blackened by age and repeated blows, leans precariously, ready to strike. Coils of rough rope twist across the floor, serpentine and patient, waiting for the right moment to constrict. Each object tells its story not in words, but in the silence it commands, the terror it imposes. Flickering torches cast flames that dance and shiver, illuminating the prisoner's face with moments of revelation. The sharp angle of cheekbones, the hollow arc of the jaw, eyes that have learned to read the very soul of a room. The chains clink with every subtle movement, a constant reminder of the body's fragility against the machinery of suffering. A rat scuttles across the floor, unnoticed by him, yet its small, ceaseless movement underlines the decay, the inevitability of vermin in places where light is rare, and hope rarer still. The air is thick with ritualized terror. Every scrape of a key in a distant lock, every creak of ceiling joists under the weight of the castle above, is orchestrated to undermine the mind before the body ever feels the sting of punishment. The prisoner closes his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids, the room comes alive. The chains glint with menace, the ropes coil with intent, and the walls themselves seem to pulse with anticipation. He imagines the voices of those who tormented him, long gone yet lingering, their whispers threading through the stone. There is a cadence to this horror, a rhythm that becomes almost meditative. Inhale fear, exhale despair, wait, endure. Hours bleed into one another. Time is measured not in minutes but in sensations. The cold seeping into bones, the water that drips like frozen tears, the weight of silence pressing down like a tide. The prisoner's stomach tightens with hunger, but it is not the gnawing of empty belly that hurts most. It is the emptiness of agency, the sensation of every choice stripped away until the only motion is the small, trembling movements allowed by the iron cuffs. And yet, within this void, the mind grows sharper, every sound amplified, every shadow alive with intent. He remembers, fleetingly, a life before the chains, a field where wind bent the wheat, a hearth where the smell of bread and smoke mingled, voices calling his name with warmth rather than malice. The memory is a knife, sweet and sharp, cutting through the darkness of his present. For a moment, he almost smiles, but the gesture dies before it reaches his lips. The chains clink again, reminding him that nostalgia is as much a prisoner as the body itself. Footsteps approach, distant, muffled, but deliberate. They do not belong to the court nor to rumor. They belong to the keepers of this subterranean world, to those who have learned the art of orchestrated fear. The prisoner shifts slightly, listening. A lock clicks, a torch flares higher, and for a heartbeat, he imagines the wheel turning, the cudgel raised. His hand brushes against the wall, fingers trembling against the cold stone, searching for something. Any purchase, any anchor, but the touch is hollow, met only by centuries of cold and decay. In the corner of his eye, shadows stretch and twist. They are alive, mocking, echoing the torment that has been repeated here 1,000 times over. Yet, even in this moment of utter helplessness, there is a spark. The mind unbroken, cataloging, observing, resisting in the only ways it can. He notes the subtle variations of the rat's scuttle, the slight rhythm in the dripping water, the change in the air as footsteps grow nearer. Each observation is survival. Each breath is defiance. The chamber seems to contract around him, yet in its suffocating embrace, he discovers a strange clarity. Fear becomes a lens, sharpening his senses, focusing attention on what is essential. The room, the tools, the silence, the ritual. His hand moves again along the wall, lingering on a rough patch of stone, imagining it as a threshold. A place where one might pass into another reality, one of escape or release, though both feel equally distant. Above, the castle stands indifferent, a monument to power and cruelty. Outside, the murmurs continue, carrying rumors, judgments, and the hollow laughter of privilege. Inside, the prisoner and the stones are alone, bound in a conversation older than memory itself. The chains, the ropes, the wheel, all speak of inevitability, of suffering codified into shapes and materials. Yet in their shadow, he begins to feel the first stirrings of agency, the mind's quiet rebellion, the whisper that one day, perhaps, fear may be turned to strength. And then, as if acknowledging this fragile spark, the torchlight shifts, casting a new pattern across the floor. The rat freezes, the chains settle, and the prisoner's hand lingers, fingertips grazing the cold stone. In that small contact, there is a silent question, one that hangs in the air like incense. How long will this ritual continue? Who is the true prisoner, the body shackled to iron, or the mind trapped within anticipation? The answer does not come. Only the quiet echo of dripping water, the patient scuttle of vermin, and the torchlight's dance, leaving the audience suspended between horror and a reverent curiosity for what unfolds next. In the final moments, the prisoner pulls his knees closer, chin resting on clasped arms. A single breath escapes, trembling yet deliberate, carrying with it the weight of suffering and the fragile hint of hope. Outside, the distant court continues its murmur, but here, in the dark, the world is reduced to this moment. The brush of stone, the taste of iron, the heartbeat of chains. And as the camera would linger, the hand resting lightly on cold stone becomes a symbol. Small, almost futile, yet profoundly human. A silent promise that even in places designed solely for suffering life, stubborn, aware, defiant, endures. A low moan rises from the shadows, tentative, almost apologetic, and is swallowed instantly by the oppressive stone around it. The walls, slick with moisture and centuries of silence, seem to lean in closer, as if listening, as if judging. Each echo dies quickly, leaving behind only the weight of the chamber's dark history. The air is thick, almost viscous, tasting of damp iron and dust, curling in the throat with each cautious breath. Chains swing lazily from hooks embedded in the ceiling, their movements ghostly and uncertain, like the memory of a long-forgotten pain. The prisoner huddles in a corner, knees drawn tight, fingers pressed to the rough stone beneath them. A cold seeped through the floor, rising into their bones and threading into the marrow. Every shiver feels monumental, every heartbeat a drum counting down an invisible sentence. They draw the air into lungs that burn with anticipation and fear, listening for the scrape of a boot on stone, the whisper of judgment, the faintest scrape of a rack being prepared somewhere deeper in the darkness. Sound here carries a significance impossible in the daylight. A shift in shadow, a cough, a sigh. They are all amplified, warning signals in a forest of stone and suffering. Torchlight flickers along the walls, casting tongues of fire that caress the instruments of torment. Pincers, spiked wheels, and racks stretch like silent predators, each groove and notch speaking the language of pain. The metal seems to glint with a life of its own, catching the faint light and reflecting it in cruel arcs. Here, every instrument is more than steel. It is a promise, a whisper of what awaits. The prisoner's eyes trace the shadows that leap and twist across these surfaces, trying to read intent from the patterns of light, as though understanding could grant immunity. Their lips move soundlessly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in a silent accusation of a fate that feels as old as the stones themselves. Beyond the chamber, faint murmurs drift through the air like ghosts of normal life, voices debating, accusing, condemning. They are reminders of a world beyond the immediate terror, a world that seems distant, unreal, and almost cruelly indifferent. The prisoner knows it exists, knows people argue and fight outside these walls. Yet here, in this suffocating cage of stone and shadow, it is irrelevant. Time itself has warped. Minutes stretch like taffy, elastic and cruel. Each second is measured not by clock or candle, but by the slow, deliberate pulse of fear coiling tighter in the chest. A candle flickers nearby, smoke rising in lazy spirals, curling around the prisoner's hunched frame. The gray haze softens edges, blurring the sharpness of stone, yet sharpens the mind in the way despair often does. Clarity carved by suffering. Every movement seems monumental. A hand brushing against the cold floor becomes an act of defiance. a tiny rebellion against the inevitability of pain. A fingertip tracing the jagged seam of the wall feels like mapping the invisible cracks of the soul, searching for a hidden exit, a forgotten hope. Here, nothing is ordinary. Everything, even the smallest gesture, carries weight, history, and meaning. The prisoner's thoughts wander, unbidden, to moments before this darkness. Faces appear, distorted by fear. A friend's betrayal, a whisper of accusation, a hurried glance that cut deeper than any blade. Regret intertwines with longing, memory and present suffering merging into a single, choking reality. They imagine the world outside, the wind carrying scents of grass and fire, the murmur of a stream over stones, the warmth of sunlight on skin, and it feels almost mythical, a cruel contrast to the cold certainty of stone beneath fingertips. A chain rattles. A foot scrapes the floor somewhere beyond the wall. Each sound commands attention, pulling the prisoner's senses outward even as the fear presses inward. They inhale sharply, the iron-laced air filling their lungs with a taste of history. Centuries of screams, whispers, and the weight of unbroken suffering. The chamber itself seems animate, its walls breathing slowly, pulses echoing in the chest. Shadows twitch and lengthen, swallowing corners of the room, creating shapes that toy with the imagination. Specters of agony, memories made solid. Time becomes elastic, flowing around the body and mind in strange, oppressive waves. The prisoner imagines the faces of those who came before them. Silent witnesses in the cold, nameless souls whose suffering has seeped into the mortar and stone. Their existence is felt in the creak of a rope, the faint scrape of an iron ring, the way the torchlight lingers longer over certain walls, as if remembering where the worst screams once echoed. The prisoner shivers again, not only from cold, but from the intimacy of history pressing in. The knowledge that their suffering is part of something larger, cruelly eternal. Yet, amid the dread, there is a fragile pulse of resistance. A single thought, a memory of warmth, of love, of defiance, offers a slender thread to cling to. The prisoner's fingers tighten against the cold floor, as if drawing strength from the earth itself, as if tracing the path of those who endured before. Every breath becomes a quiet act of rebellion, every heartbeat a quiet statement that the spirit, though battered, has not yielded. In the silence between sounds, there is life. In the shadow between torches, a fragile hope flickers. The torchlight wavers, casting giant, trembling silhouettes that dance along the stone. The shadows swallow corners of the room, stretching across instruments and chains alike, creating landscapes of terror and memory that shift with each flicker. The prisoner watches, breath shallow, eyes wide, as the room seems to inhale and exhale with a life of its own. And in this living darkness, they sense a promise of endurance, of the human spirit's stubborn refusal to be extinguished, even in the presence of unimaginable pain. Outside the chamber, life continues. Trials, accusations, whispered plots. But here, inside, time is different, sculpted by fear and shadow. Every movement is monumental, every sound carries weight, and every second is both a torment and a testament. The prisoner curls further into themselves, a small figure in a vast cathedral of stone and suffering, but a figure still capable of thought, of memory, of hope. The candle guttering in the haze seems to understand, its flame bowing low against the draft, fighting against extinction. And in its trembling light, the prisoner's spirit flickers in return, fragile but persistent. Shadows press in closer, darkness pooling like ink across the floor, swallowing the instruments, the walls, the chains. Yet within this enveloping night, the mind finds a sanctuary in imagination, memory, and the stubborn insistence that survival is not only physical, but emotional. A hand reaches out once more, brushing against cold stone, tracing the seam, mapping the cracks, and in that gesture is a quiet defiance. A low moan rises again, this time mingling with the whisper of chains, the hiss of candle smoke, the sigh of stone. The chamber breathes around the prisoner, wrapping history, fear, and endurance into a single, unbroken presence. And as the torchlight falters, shadows swallowing corners, swallowing instruments, swallowing history and hope alike, the chamber waits, patient and inevitable, holding within it the promise of unfolding torment, and the fragile endurance of the human spirit that will meet it. A cold wind whistles through the narrow slit of a high chamber window, threading its way across the stone like the hiss of a restless spirit. It carries with it the scent of wet earth and smoke from distant hearths, an olfactory reminder of the world beyond these walls. A world alive, warm, free. Here, in the belly of the fortress, the stone underfoot glistens, slick with years of sweat, blood, and human despair, as though the walls themselves exhale a memory of suffering. Chains hang from the ceiling like coiled serpents, their cold iron gleaming in the hesitant light, clinking softly when brushed by hands too weary to resist the temptation of contact. The sound is subtle, but it carries, a whisper in the silence that fills the chamber with anticipation and dread. A prisoner rocks slowly on a bed of straw, the coarse fibers biting into raw skin, a constant abrasion that reminds the body of its confinement. Every muscle tenses as ears strain to catch the faintest metallic echo. Footsteps in the corridor, the scrape of a key against lock, the distant murmur of guards speaking in low, deliberate tones. Above him, the instruments of torment lie in waiting. Spiked wheels, iron tongs and racks, arranged like a morbid altar. Their presence is both promise and threat, ritualized prelude to suffering that is as methodical as it is inevitable. Candle flames tremble at their waxen posts, casting elongated shadows that twist and merge across faces etched in despair. These faces, pale, hollowed, yet stubbornly alive, seem almost to grow from the walls themselves, becoming one with the stone, enduring the weight of their own histories. Outside, muffled sounds drift in from the courtyard. The clang of horseshoes, the laughter of children, the distant echo of a bell. They are ghostly reminders of freedom, of life continuing without notice of the human agony nested within these walls. Each drip of water from the cracked ceiling falls with a metronomic precision, a rhythm at once hypnotic and cruel. It counts the moments in slow agony, marking time that is neither mercy nor comfort, but a relentless, patient witness to endurance. The air itself seems to vibrate with tension, a tangible pressure pressing on lungs and heart alike, filled with the unspoken memory of resilience and the faint, stubborn pulse of hope. Fingers trace the cold stone walls, brushing against the rough, pitted surfaces as if seeking some secret, some pattern that might explain the world outside this chamber. Eyes strain into darkness, carving shapes from shadows, constructing hope where none might dwell. In the mind, imagination flickers, conjuring both terror and possibility. A face, a whisper, a glimmer of escape. The prisoner rocks on, each movement a defiance of inertia, a protest against the totality of the dark. Yet it is a quiet rebellion, almost imperceptible against the oppressive stone and iron. In the corner, a shadow stretches across the floor, fragile and elongated, yet somehow defiant. It moves not with the light but against it, a silent sentinel of endurance within the cruel embrace of the chamber. It is a reminder that even here, in the most merciless corners of the world, life persists, not in triumph, perhaps, but in sheer stubborn survival. This shadow, delicate yet unyielding, seems to breathe with the chamber itself, as if both prisoner and stone recognize their intertwined fates. Outside, The wind shifts, carrying a faint smell of rain, of soil upturned by unseen hands. The sound of water dripping continues, each drop a small punctuation, a punctuation that counts time and tests patience. The prisoner listens, not for rescue, but for meaning, for signs that the world beyond these walls has not forgotten him. Each metallic echo, each flicker of candlelight, each shifting shadow becomes a story, a narrative of endurance written in the language of suffering. A distant scream cuts through the courtyard sounds, sharp and human. It is quickly swallowed by stone, yet it reverberates here as though the chamber itself remembers every voice that has cried out in desperation. The prisoner flinches, but the body does not collapse. Muscles tighten, hands grip straw, eyes widen. Fear is present, unmistakable, but it is interwoven with recognition. The recognition that every moment of torment has been met with some measure of defiance. In this place, the line between life and despair blurs. Yet even in its shadow, the will to survive persists, flickering faintly, stubbornly, like the last candle still burning at the far end of the hall. The candlelight dances across the iron instruments again, revealing the subtle etchings, the deliberate markings of those who made suffering a craft. The prisoner's gaze follows each line, each spike, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement of history itself, the history of pain, endurance, and memory. Every stone in the wall, every drop of water, every sigh of the wind is a testament to lives lived here, each one inscribed invisibly upon the body, upon the soul. A rat scurries across the floor, its tiny claws echoing against stone. Pauses, sniffing, alert. The prisoner's eyes meet its quick, dark movements. There is kinship here, in the small and fragile, in the persistent breath of life against the inevitability of death. Even in this chamber, in the cold, in the shadow of cruelty, life finds a way, whether in the flutter of a shadow, the whisper of wind, or the rhythm of dripping water. As night deepens, the chamber seems to breathe with its own quiet rhythm. Shadows lengthen, merge, and twist, and yet one remains steadfast, stretching across stone and straw, a solitary mark of resistance. The prisoner closes his eyes briefly, listening to the wind, the water, the distant murmur of freedom. Within him, a fragile hope stirs, unspoken but unwavering. It is the quiet promise that even in the darkest corners, even under the heaviest chains, endurance will leave its trace. The wind subsides, leaving the chamber in hushed expectancy. Candle flames flicker once, twice, and settle, as if bowing to the weight of time. The shadow lingers, long and lean, a silent testament to survival and defiance. Beyond the slit window, the world continues, indifferent yet present. The prisoner rocks on the straw, each sway a heartbeat, a subtle declaration that even here, in the belly of cruelty, the human spirit endures. And as the cold wind rises again, whispering across stone and iron, it carries with it not just the scent of smoke and wet earth, but the quiet insistence of life. A shadow stretched, fragile yet defiant, awaiting the dawn that will someday, inevitably, come. The iron door groans open, and the air exhales a breath long held in darkness. It carries the pungent odor of mold, rusted iron, and human despair, an invisible weight that presses against the skin and fills the lungs with a tangible dread. Torches sputter in the thin draft, their flames flaring and retreating like living creatures caught between courage and fear. Shadows leap along the cold, uneven stone walls, each flicker a brief confession of secrets too cruel to speak aloud. On the rough straw below, the prisoner curls into themselves, every movement a compromise with pain. The coarse fibers scratch at bare skin, leaving trails of irritation that feel like a memory of suffering. Constant, unyielding, intimate. Chains hang from hooks, swinging slowly in the convective sighs of the chamber. They groan under their own weight, whispering tales of every soul who came before. The whispered prayers, the screams, the quiet sobs that were never heard beyond these walls. Each chain is a sentence, each link a testament. And around them, the instruments of torment lie in deliberate arrangement, polished to a cold brilliance that seems to draw the torchlight into itself. Wheels that twist and break, pincers that promise jagged pain, hammers that await the hand of authority. All lie ready as if anticipating the story that must unfold. They are silent witnesses, patient, cruelly calm, the steel and iron versions of a heart that has long since hardened to suffering. Outside, footsteps echo. They are measured and unyielding, the sound of inevitable authority marching down a corridor that seems to extend into eternity. The prisoner's ears catch the rhythm, the metallic click of boots against stone, the subtle scuff of a cloak brushing the wall. Each step is a drumbeat in a symphony of fear, a percussion that commands attention, that reminds the body and mind that resistance is not a privilege here, but a luxury long spent. The chamber responds, not with walls but with silence, a silence that amplifies the smallest sounds. The scrape of a heel against stone, the shuffle of breath, the subtle drip of water falling from a fissure above. It is a living silence, one that waits for confession, for reaction, for surrender. Candle smoke swirls through the room, forming ephemeral veils between the stark light and the oppressive darkness. It wraps around corners, threads itself through cracks in the walls, and hovers above the prisoner's bowed head, marking a threshold between hope and despair. The prisoner's eyes lift, catching a fragment of sky through the narrow window high above, a piece of blue untouched by human cruelty, a reminder of life outside these walls. It is a slender thread, almost too thin to grasp, yet its presence gnaws at the edges of despair. Fingers trace the cold stone walls for comfort, for proof that the world is solid, that it can still be felt, that it might still be endured. The torchlight dances across skin, walls, and iron alike, a living narrative written in fire and shadow, a story that must be read between heartbeats. Every sensory detail presses into consciousness. The cold stone that bites through rags, the acrid scent of metal and sweat, the metallic tang of fear that rises to the tongue with every inhalation. The room is alive, not with movement, but with expectation. A soft draft carries the faintest whiff of earth from the distant courtyard, a reminder of seasons beyond the cell, of winds that do not carry whispers of death. The prisoner rocks slowly, a primitive motion of survival, holding on to memory as if memory could shield them from what is to come. And yet, the mind drifts, filling the empty spaces with imagined horrors, rehearsed in small increments, sharpened by anticipation. Each imagined pain becomes real as the iron beneath fingernails, as tangible as the chains that whisper and groan above. From the corridor, muffled voices begin to take shape. They are fragments, indistinct, yet carrying the weight of command. Words intended to instruct, to break, to assert power over what is already fractured. The prisoner's chest rises and falls with shallow breaths, the body tensing with every step closer. There is no sudden violence here, only the slow accrual of tension, each sound a tightening coil in the chest. One could measure time by the pulse of footsteps, by the subtle increase in the hiss of candle flame, by the occasional scrape of leather across stone. The chamber is a crucible of expectation, and the prisoner is at its center, raw and unshielded, feeling every vibration, every whisper, as though it were the prelude to final reckoning. The torchlight moves again, its glow a transient caress across walls scarred by previous cruelty. Every scratch, every stain, Every dent in the stone tells a story of endurance and ruin. The prisoner's eyes follow, desperate for narrative, for continuity, for any signal that suffering might be understood, even briefly. And in these moments, thoughts become a kind of dialogue. Why me? Why here? How long? Questions hover, unanswerable, suspended in the smoke-heavy air, dissolving before the lips can even shape them. There is no response, only the dance of light, the whispers of iron, and the cold, unrelenting presence of history pressed into stone and chain. A drop of water falls from the ceiling, the sound startling in its singularity, resonant against the stone. It lands on the prisoner's shoulder with a sting that mirrors the anticipation in the chest, a punctuation mark in an otherwise wordless narrative. The prisoner flinches, breath hitching, yet clings to the wall, to the straw, to the fleeting threads of sky beyond the window. Here, endurance becomes ritual. A measured exhale, a small adjustment of limbs, a recalibration of attention to the texture of straw, the warmth of brief candlelight, the distant echoes that signal human authority beyond these walls. Survival is a choreography, intricate and fragile, performed in silence and in shadows. The instruments of torment gleam in the flickering torchlight, the steel whispering promises both vivid and abstract. Wheels, hammers, pincers, they are more than tools. They are a language of power, of obedience extracted by design and necessity. Yet even as they await their cruel purpose, the prisoner finds in their reflection a peculiar steadiness. The mind begins to map paths of endurance, to catalog memories of strength, however small, to cling to the smallest fragments of hope, whether in the sky above or in the fleeting warmth of a torch. The chamber becomes a paradox. It is both a tomb of human cruelty and a forge of quiet resistance, a place where suffering is measured not only by what is inflicted, but by what can be endured. The final moment lingers on that fragile intersection, where terror meets endurance, where the tangible, chains, iron, stone, straw, merges with the intangible, hope, memory, fear. The prisoner's gaze rests once more on the sky fragment, hands pressed to stone for grounding, breath measured and deliberate. The candle smoke twists above, drawing shapes like fleeting omens, separating light from darkness, despair from resilience. Here, in this suspended heartbeat, the audience is invited to dwell on the complexity of human suffering and persistence. The air is thick with anticipation, yet threaded with the unspoken promise that the story will unfold. Pain will be met, endurance will be tested, and the human spirit, however battered, will continue to carve its path through shadow and fire. And as the corridor's voices draw closer, the torchlight flickers one last time. The chains groan a final whisper, and the prisoner rocks gently on straw, poised between the known cruelty of the present and the uncertain horizon of what is to come. The camera lingers on the fragment of sky, untouched and indifferent, as the scene breathes a pause heavy with expectation, an unbroken bridge to the next chapter of human will, resistance, and the relentless passage through suffering toward whatever faint light remains. A single candle guttered in the darkness, its flame quivering as though afraid to endure. Shadows stretched and writhed across the damp stone walls, flickering in uneasy rhythm, revealing glimpses of chains dangling like silent sentinels, spiked racks glinting faintly in the wavering light, and rusted keys that promised nothing but pain. The air itself was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of iron and the persistent, clinging damp of centuries-old stone. A faint, acrid trace of sweat lingered, marking the passage of those who had come before. Bodies broken, spirits frayed, hope extinguished. In the far corner, a prisoner huddled, shoulders drawn inward, as if he could fold himself small enough to vanish. Every breath was a trembling confession, every exhalation a silent prayer. His hands clutched at straw, the coarse strands biting through skin, scratching open lines of raw, immediate pain. Outside, footsteps echoed, sharp against the stone, deliberate and unyielding. A slow, measured drum that spoke of judgment, of torment yet to come. The chamber seemed to breathe with the memory of countless suffering, listening, remembering, exhaling centuries of anguish. The instruments lay ready, cruel and waiting. Tongs blackened by use, hammers scarred from the repeated imposition of pain, wheels whose edges gleamed with menace, each curve and notch carrying a story of agony. The air shimmered with their unspoken threat, a silent litany of horrors, as if the room itself bore witness, cataloging every wretched moment that had passed within its walls. Candle smoke drifted lazily, curling like restless spirits, softening the harsh lines of the stone while sharpening the terror in the flickering shadows. Each inhale brought the prisoner closer to the chill certainty of suffering. Each exhale a defiance that wavered but did not entirely fade. A distant bell tolled, its sound rolling over the stone corridors, cutting through the oppressive silence like a reminder of the world beyond. Courts, verdicts, laws, the machinery of medieval justice grinding without mercy or pause. Yet here, in this subterranean sanctum of fear, time seemed suspended, measured only by the slow, dragging pulse of dread. The prisoner's eyes roamed the chamber with desperate vigilance, tracing every shadow, every gleam of steel, seeking patterns, seeking mercy, seeking some fragment of understanding in a world constructed solely to strip it away. Fingers brushed against the rough stone walls, rough and cold, each groove a tactile echo of lives endured, of resistance attempted and broken. The walls whispered of the endurance of the human spirit, of a stubborn, quiet defiance that thrived even in the smallest acts. A trembling hand refusing to loosen its grip, a heart refusing to yield entirely to despair. Outside, the footsteps grew louder, closer, a measured rhythm that promised both inevitability and revelation. Memories of the prisoner's life unfolded behind closed eyes. The warmth of sunlight on bare arms, the laughter of companions now long gone, the fleeting taste of freedom. Each recollection struck like a blade, a reminder of what had been lost, what could never be reclaimed. And yet, in the midst of terror, there was the pulse of something unbroken, something enduring. The mind, even when shackled and starved, could wander, could imagine, could find solace in the faint glimmer of hope that stubbornly refused to extinguish. A clatter echoed in the chamber, metal scraping stone, and the prisoner flinched, instinctively pressing closer to the floor. Shadows danced more violently now, thrown into chaos by the sudden flare of the candle. And in that movement, in the shivering light, the chamber seemed almost alive. It leaned in, breathed with him, anticipated his smallest twitch, its silence a heavier weight than any chain. The instruments of torment gleamed as if aware of their own histories, each mark and dent a chronicle of screams, of vows, of resistance and surrender alike. Time slowed, moments stretched into eternity. The prisoner's heartbeat thrummed in his ears, a drumbeat of terror and endurance intertwined. The bell tolled again, faint and mournful, carrying a resonance of inevitability. And in that sound was the reminder that life moved forward beyond these walls, indifferent, relentless, while inside, the past and present coiled together like serpents in the gloom. Hands trembling, he reached for the straw beneath him, clutching it as though it were a lifeline, an anchor to reality itself. He imagined the warmth of firelight, the touch of human kindness, the possibility of sunrise breaking through the oppression of night. Every small memory became a defiance against the chamber, against the instruments, against the centuries of cruelty embedded in stone and metal. And yet, fear was never absent. It thrummed in his veins, a living presence, whispering of betrayal, of broken bodies, of hope cruelly extinguished. The candle flickered again, almost extinguished, and in that small, dancing shadow, he saw both the specter of death and the stubborn spark of life. Each trembling flame became a mirror of the human will, to survive, to endure, to resist even when every fiber of the world pushed toward submission. Footsteps receded, leaving silence that was not relief, but a different, more insidious weight. The room exhaled, and with it, the prisoner felt the pulse of centuries, the legacy of pain and courage coiled together in the dark. Every scar, every dent in stone and metal, was a testament to those who had come before, those who had endured, who had whispered to themselves in the shadows that they would not be wholly claimed by fear. The candle guttered once more, smoke trailing in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of iron, damp stone, and the faint trace of human defiance. Shadows stretched long and trembling across the chamber, and the prisoner, small and fragile, pressed himself closer to the stone floor. Somewhere beyond, life continued, unfeeling, relentless. But here, in this suspended darkness, he existed in the tension between despair and endurance, terror and hope. And as he closed his eyes, not in surrender but in preparation, in silent gathering of what courage remained, the shadows themselves seemed to lean closer. They carried the weight of centuries, the whisper of chains, the promise of instruments long rested, and the unbroken pulse of those who had survived. In that moment, the chamber was no longer just a place of torment. It was a crucible, a mirror of the human spirit stripped bare, waiting to see whether it would bend, break, or endure. The candle's final flicker caught on the edge of the metal tongs, glinting like the eye of some ancient, patient observer. Smoke curled and twisted, softening edges while sharpening fear, and the prisoner felt the weight of history pressing in from every side. Every heartbeat was a drum of survival, every inhalation a stolen triumph. And though the darkness pressed, though fear whispered in every shadow, there was a glimmer, a fragile, stubborn spark, that life, even here, refused to surrender entirely. And in that suspended, trembling moment, the chamber exhaled one last sigh. The story of pain, courage, and unyielding spirit that had been written into stone and iron for centuries was ready to continue, unfolding beyond the walls, into corridors of cruelty and corridors of hope alike. The candle dimmed, leaving the prisoner poised on the knife edge of dread and endurance, and the shadows leaned in, whispering of what was to come.